The first griddle that I had. And what I did was I bought one of these, I call them portable griddles. They're a flat cast iron slab about that big. I put it on my Weber kettle grill, so the heat source was charcoal. I added some wood chunks to the fire. And then I cooked shrimp and padron peppers in the style of Spanish tapas bar shrimp. They were absolutely amazing. They were crusty, they were smoky, they were sizzling, full of flavor. But for the outdoor griddler, I'm going to assume you'll buy a griddle, okay? I suppose somebody who has blacksmith skills could forge one, but basically you need a thick slab of heavy metal like cast iron. But you position that over a campfire, you get little wisps of smoke curling over the edges of the griddle. You don't necessarily need, a propane fired 4 burner 48-inch commercial griddle. However, if you have one, just makes life that much easier.
Welcome to the Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. At Mother Earth News for 50 years and counting, we've been dedicated to conserving the planet's natural resources while helping you conserve your financial resources. In this podcast, we host conversations with experts in the fields of sustainability, homesteading, natural health, and more to share all about how you can live well wherever you are in a way that values both people and our Mother Earth. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends. I'm Josh Wilder, the content director for Mother Earth News, and with me today I have Steven Raichlen, a multi-award-winning writer and television host and past Mother Earth News fair speaker. His books include the international blockbusters The Barbecue Bible, How to Grill, Project Smoke, the New York Times bestselling Planet Barbecue, and his newest book, Project Griddle. So, Steven, how are you doing today?
Couldn't be better. Thank you.
So this will be coming out around Memorial Day. Now, folks might have a few different appliances in their backyard to entertain. And you mentioned in the book that you could hear the murmurs of discontent from diehard grill fans. I understand you have to be diplomatic, but since I think it's fair to say the grill is arguably the default backyard cooker, what is your elevator pitch for the griddle?
Well, two of the world's biggest grill companies, Weber and Traeger, came out with stand-up outdoor griddles last year. It's really say no more. These are not competing tools for outdoor cooking. These are complementary. Certain things you do on your griddle, certain things you do on your grill. The griddle will never replace the grill, but at the same time, there's a lot you can do on a griddle that you can't do on a grill.
Now, a lot of our audience are do-it-yourself types. Now, if someone asked you how to DIY a griddle into their outdoor homestead kitchen, what might be a setup you would recommend?
Okay, super easy because it was the first griddle that I had. And what I did was I bought one of these, I call them portable griddles. They're a flat cast iron slab about that big. I put it on my Weber kettle grill, so the heat source was charcoal. I added some wood chunks to the fire. And then I cooked shrimp and padron peppers in the style of Spanish tapas bar shrimp. They were absolutely amazing. They were crusty, they were smoky, they were sizzling, full of flavor. But for the outdoor griddler, I'm going to assume you'll buy a griddle, okay? I suppose somebody who has blacksmith skills could forge one, but basically you need a thick slab of heavy metal like cast iron. But you position that over a campfire, you get little wisps of smoke curling over the edges of the griddle. You don't necessarily need, a propane fired 4 burner 48-inch commercial griddle. However, if you have one, just makes life that much easier.
Sure. Now, speaking of the specific kinds, and I think for all of them, you mentioned how important it is to be clean. Now, what sort of materials and designs are most durable for long-term use?
Yeah, I would say the sort of the two materials that griddles come in are cast iron or carbon steel and stainless steel. And stainless steel griddles tend to be more in a restaurant application. I don't like them as much because they're hard to season. They have to be really well seasoned or food will stick. Cast iron, on the other hand, because it's slightly porous, very easy to season. And the more you use it, the more nonstick it comes. Now, in terms of tools, you want one of these. This is a scraper, and this is for scraping off your griddle to clean it before you get started. You want one of these. This is an offset spatula. I like the ones with the holes in the spatula so they release the steam so your food truly sears rather than steams on the griddle. You want one of these. This is a griddle dome, and you can just use an inverted metal bowl. But when you're cooking something thick, but let's say chicken thighs or a big thick pork chop, you place this on top. This captures the heat, so you get to cook from the top down as well as from the bottom up. And you'll notice you want to buy one of these that has holes, some little vent holes in the griddle to let the steam out. We're really about searing, not about steaming.
I'm curious, how did you, and you talk a little bit about this in the book, but can you talk a little bit about the Wagyu steak story and how that kind of got you down this path?
You bet. So how did I get into griddling? Blame it on a steak, and not only a steak, blame it on one of those A5 Wagyu steaks, super well marbled, so well marbled, in fact, that they look like white lace laid over a red tablecloth. We're talking about probably 50% meat, 50% fat. They're actually absolutely exquisite. But if you tried to grill one of those on a conventional grill, the melting fat, the whole thing would set on fire. So I took my cue from a Japanese steak master that uses a teppan, which is the Japanese word for a griddle, to cook the A5 Wagyu. The results were spectacular. I mean, the outside was crusty, seared, brown, inside meltingly tender, luscious. I got no flare ups. I had all that wonderful melted Wagyu fat to cook my potatoes in afterwards. And it was a revelation. That was the light bulb that went off and said, hey, wait a minute. Maybe there's something to this whole griddling thing. Let's see what else we can do with it.
Yeah, and it seems like you have some unbelievable recipes in this book and some of the amazing food. And you think about it compared to a grill, and you can fit so much more onto a griddle than you can on a grill. Can you describe some of the larger meals that you have in the book?
Yeah, in fact, in the book, I have these menus, right? A tapas bar menu, an American diner menu. And the idea is to take advantage of the griddle's large size to cook a whole meal on the griddle. And what I do is I tell you how to sequence it, what to make first, what to make second. If you're making breakfast on the griddle, and for a lot of people, that's the entry meal into a griddle. So I would start probably by cooking the bacon and the sausage because you want to use the melting fat to lubricate your griddle for the next course. Then I'd probably cook the hash browns because they move them over to the side. You can keep them warm. Ditto for the potatoes. Last thing you want to cook are your dirty eggs, which is the Steven Raichlen version of a fried egg. And what I do is I chop real fine. I chop fresh herbs, sage, basil, rosemary, tarragon, garlic, scallions. And I melt a little circle of butter on the griddle where each egg is going to go. And I put those ingredients first, the chopped herbs. Then I crack an egg on top. But what happens is as the egg is frying on the griddle, it cooks and crusts all those herbs. You flip the egg over to do the sunny side up thing, and you wind up with a beautiful, fragrant herb crust on top. And it looks a little dirty, so that's why I call it a dirty egg.
That's great. And that style of cooking, it's not something you can do on a grill. And also talk about reducing food waste and what you can do because sometimes food falls between the grates in a grill.
Oh, yeah, there's absolutely no food waste. And not only no food waste because the griddle is a solid cook surface, but also think about it. Many foods, let's say a hamburger, if you're cooking a hamburger on a grill, you're going to have you're going to lose a certain amount of the juices, right? Because they're going to just sizzle and fall into the coals. And there's some advantage of that because they get volatilized and they come up and they do flavor your meat in a way. But on a griddle, there's no loss of those cooking juices. Your food actually cooks in those cooked food juices. So, be it if you're cooking fish, if you're cooking smash burgers or chicken, you're actually keeping flavor in by keeping those meat juices on the griddle.
If you're on an off-grid situation, we already talked about having a griddle over a fire, but if you were, say, wanted some sort of griddle that could run off of battery power, what sort of electric griddles have you worked with in the past?
Weber makes an electric griddle. Many companies do. I think Cuisinart makes an electric griddle. I'll be honest with you, I've not had a lot of experience with electric griddles because I'm more an outdoor guy and I either use the propane or griddle positioned directly over a campfire or wood fire. But the principle's the same. You're cooking on a slab of hot metal. And there's a food scientist talk about a phenomenon called the Maillard effect, named for a French chemist who lived in the last century. And what the Maillard effect is, it basically has to do with the caramelization of meat proteins in meat and of plant sugars in vegetables and fruits. And all of those luscious, toasty, caramel, meaty flavors that we associate with griddle cooked foods, they develop on the griddles. So that's what makes griddle food so flavorful. By the way, and I have to be a little mysterious about this, but I even devised a way to smoke on a griddle. And I've got a couple recipes, like there's a barbecue chicken with Alabama white sauce that is quite literally smoked with hickory chips or hickory pellets. And I can't tell you exactly how you have to do it. You have to buy the book. And that was my way of saying to all my barbecue followers, hey guys, come on, I have not gone over to the dark side. Look, I'm even smoking on a griddle.
I can tell you our neighbors over in Kansas City would certainly be interested in trying some of that.
You bet. You bet.
So you've explored global barbecue traditions in the past. Can you talk about how this book delves into regional griddle cooking styles from different cultures?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And whenever I write a new book, first thing I do is I pack a suitcase. I pack a suitcase. So this book involved research in Spain, in Italy, in Japan, Taiwan, the Caribbean, because griddling is virtually universal. Okay, it's done everywhere on the planet. And think about the evolution of live fire cooking. So, step number one, Homo erectus throws a hunk of meat directly on the coals. You know, still survives today in caveman grilling. Evolutionary step number two, you stick that meat on a stick and you hold it over the fire. So then we've got shish kebab and rotisserie cooking. Step number three, you heat a rock with fire and then you cook the food directly on the rock. So that's really the precursor of the griddle. But griddling, it's universal, and I've tried to. I'm probably 12 or 15 different countries that are whose griddle specialties are featured in Project Griddle.
So what were some of the most interesting historical facts or cultural insights you uncovered during these travels?
First of all, etymologically, our word griddle comes from the Latin craticulum, and that is also the same etymological root as our word gridiron or grill. So the two are related. So that was another reason why my barbecue fans shouldn't be too mad at me, because there's historical precedent. Another thing that was really interesting to find was the second earliest griddle reference that I found in the English language, the Oxford English Dictionary, is a recipe for griddled fish, and it's actually the recipe is written in rhyming couplets. So that was pretty cool.
That's great. As far as a growing interest in plant-based diets, are there any recipes in the book that talk about vegetarian diets?
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite dishes, and my wife and I make it once a week, is barbecue tofu. And we season it with homemade barbecue spice and cook it on the griddle. And we griddle the buns and griddle the onions, and the tomatoes and lettuce obviously have to stay fresh. But that is a great meatless dish that honestly I eat once a week. By the way, don't tell my barbecue fans that I eat tofu, because that could play poorly. There are many grilled cheese recipes in the book. There's a quesadilla, there's a piadina from Italy, tapas bar mushrooms. There's these little cheese discs which are really cool. You take grated manchego cheese and you put it directly on the griddle, and you cook it just long enough to melt the cheese, turn it over, cook the other side the same way, put it on a wire rack, and as it hardens, it gets crisp like a potato chip. And by the
Mhm.
way, speaking of potato chips, last night we made griddled potato chips, and a lot less fat than a commercial deep fried potato chip. Absolutely delicious.
Sounds delicious. Tofu is notorious for sticking when it's sautéed or baked. Does the Maillard technique on the griddle alleviate that?
Absolutely. For me, the challenge of cooking tofu lies in grilling it. And what I do is I press the tofu, I get extra firm tofu. But on a griddle, there's no stick whatsoever. That's the beauty. Hot griddle, oiled well, bought the tofu dry. It's fantastic. I had some in the fridge yesterday, but I ate it for lunch. But that's a really good dish.
I'll have to give that one a try. I appreciate your time and I'll let you go. But any last words for anyone who's interested in a griddle but needs that final push over the ledge?
Absolutely. First of all, if Steven Raichlen did it, you can do it. Second of all, if you want more information on it, or go to my website, which is barbecuebible.com, BARBECUE, BIBLE.com, and sign up for my Up and Smoke newsletter, because we send you free recipes, free techniques, restaurant reviews, etc. every week. And if you want to follow me on social media, it's Steven Raichlen on Facebook and Instagram, and we try and answer every question and comment. So griddle on.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Sure. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends. To listen to more podcasts and get connected on our social media, visit www.motherearthnews.com/podcast. You can also email us at podcast@ogdenpubs.com with any questions or suggestions. Our podcast production team includes Kenny Coogan, Alyssa Warner, and myself, Josh Wilder. Music for this episode is the song Hustle by Kevin MacLeod. The Mother Earth News and Friends podcast is a production of Ogden Publications.
Until next time, don't forget to love your mother.